So hello everybody, welcome to Plaque Stage Pass, episode 4, where today we're talking about John Archer, obviously, because episode 4 of Plaques of the Future is about him as well. So I am joined by Howard and Tatenda. I said this last time, but the last few times that I've introduced people, I just haven't done them justice, so I'm just going to let you guys introduce yourselves, because I think that's nicer. So I don't mind who leads.
Tatenda, why don't you go first?
Sure thing. Hello everyone, I'm Tatenda. I'm going to be playing the voice of John Archer. And I'm just interested to getting to know more about the character and getting stuck into it.
And I'm Howard Spencer. I am senior historian on the Blue Plaques team at English Heritage, and I did the research behind John Archer's plaque, which went up about 8 years ago. So I'm happy to be here talking about him again.
Cool. Definitely the right person to be speaking to, I would say, if you've done all the research to get him the plaque. So and I'm Imogen, and I've hosted the last 3 episodes, so you probably are aware of that by now, so we won't go into that. The first kind of question for you, Howard, is just about the picture of society that John was working in at the time. What did life look like for a typical civilian in London at that time, and particularly for people of colour as well?
Well, he lived in Battersea, and Battersea at the time was a essentially working class London suburb, inner London suburb. There would not have been a large number of non-white people living there at that time. In fact, in the 1911 census, I believe that there were only 11 people of West Indian backgrounds living in Battersea, which is pretty extraordinarily low. So it would have looked very different to how it looks now, and life would have been very different for working class people. Particularly, and I was thinking about this last night about how best to encapsulate that, and I guess what would be the one thing that we would notice if we got teleported back that would be different, and I guess maybe it might be sanitation, lack of bathrooms in houses in the certainly of the lower classes. You know, middle class people did have them, but and upper class people, but among the lower classes, you didn't have a bathroom. You had a tin bath that hung up on a hook, and when you wanted a bath, you went to the local baths, which became a term for swimming baths. But actually, at the time, there were slipper baths. You were actually given your towel and your soap. It was part of the deal, and you went in and you had your bath, and it was a big event. I guess it was a bit of luxury almost. So I guess that would have been the kind of one of the major difference. And houses were largely lit by gas. Electricity hadn't gone very far by 120 years ago, which is when we're talking. John Archer first came to Battersea in the 1890s. We first sort of find him there in 1897-98, around that time. So yeah, it's a very different world to the one we know now. I mean, a lot of the buildings are still there, and of course that's the thing. I mean, the plaque, it's really an indicator of that link between that person and the building, and that's still there, and it's still, if he teleported back, he would recognise the house. I mean, it's one that hasn't outwardly changed. It's a really nice classic late Victorian terraced house. It's a sort of it's become very desirable. Of course, Battersea's now gone a long way up the social scale from the period I'm talking about. So that would be very recognisable to him. But the lives that people live within those houses are just so different. It's hard to compute it really. But those are just a few of the differences.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about, obviously, considering those the situation of society at that time. What was the state of politics like, particularly around London, and sort of what did that political world look like that John Archer was going into?
Well, you're getting the start of mass democracy, really. I mean, well, women still don't have the vote. No women get the vote until 1918. but you are getting more participatory democracy from men, and in fact women do have the vote in some local elections before 1918. It's a slightly more nuanced picture than is often said. So politically it's kind of a very it's really sort of starting to ramp up. I mean, the London County Council, which is a big elected body that covers the whole of London, starts in 1888. Before then, you haven't got such institutions, or at least it was sort of run much more on a on a sort of non-democratic basis. But actually having elected local officials is something that's sort of coming in around that time. And Battersea is a real cradle for the Labour movement, and Archer was very integral to that sort of early history of what became the Labour Party. It wasn't called the Labour Party when Archer started, but he's important to that in the Battersea area.
Before Archer got into politics, would you know anything about his earlier stages of life? Sort of how he grew up, or family life? Because I can't imagine it being easy for a man of colour, especially growing up, in Battersea, and growing up to have so much power and essentially change things for the future. Would you know anything about his earlier stages of life?
There are some things that are known about his earlier life. It's kind of, there's lots of intriguing sort of holes in it. But to tell you briefly, what we do know is we know he was born in Liverpool, and he talks about this, in fact, in his acceptance speech when he becomes mayor, which we'll talk about a bit later. So he's born in Liverpool. His father is Barbadian. His mother is Irish, and he himself goes to sea, which obviously a lot of people in Liverpool did. And we think that he can be picked up in the 1881 census on board a ship that's moored at Plymouth at that point. There is a John Archer who was born in Liverpool, and it kind of tallies. I mean, we can't be absolutely certain that it's him, but it's probably him. So that's the background. And he seems to have been involved in music at an early stage. He was, even when he was in Battersea in the 1890s, he's recorded as a manager of a group called the Pennsylvania Jubilee Singers. Wouldn't it be wonderful to know what they sounded like, what they did? But that's all we have is the name. So he was involved in that. And then he got into photography, and that was his main sort of actual profession, because of course councillors then and now, it's not a full-time job. It's considered to be something you do. You maybe get an allowance or something for it, but it's not a full-time job. It's not like being an MP. So he has a photographic shop on Battersea Park Road. He runs his business out of that, and that's interesting in itself, because of course photography was a very kind of a fairly young science or pastime at that time. It was only becoming a sort of a mass thing at that point. So I guess if he was around today, you'd say he would have been a tech entrepreneur or something like that. That would be the kind of equivalent thing, and that's often what you get. You get people who belong to ethnic or religious minorities who find a lot of the avenues that are open to the kind of others aren't really open to them, or it's quite difficult to get into them, so they get into emerging territories. That's something that you kind of notice right across the board, really, and I think this is probably true of Archer getting into photography, and as I say, that's his business, and it's what he carries on doing until about 1929, and then he actually becomes he devotes the rest of his life, that's not much of he only lived for another 3 years, but the rest of his life was entirely devoted to politics. And interestingly, it doesn't seem that he made very much. I mean, he lived a rich life, but he didn't die a rich man, it would seem. We can't find. I had another look today actually for his probate record. Maybe someone else somewhere knows different, but I've had a look in the registers and he's not there, which would tend to indicate that by the time he died, which time his wife had also died, that he didn't leave very much at all. So
I mean, obviously talking about his life before politics, was there anything that we know incentivized him to get involved in politics, or is there anything that's likely to have steered him in that direction?
Well, the story is that he was a Roman Catholic, and what got him originally involved in sort of politics in terms of sort of public speaking, public campaigning, were campaigns against spiritualism, which was a big thing around that time. The kind of communing with spirits of the dead, and of course that's kind of goes against Catholic teaching. So he was campaigning against that. And what I don't quite get is where you then get into sort of social concerns and socialist or progressive politics. I'm not quite sure where he made the leap, except that he obviously he got into this sort of John Burns inspired group. Interestingly, his mother's maiden name was Burns. I don't think there was any connection other than that a light may have gone on when he saw the man's name. But it's not entirely certain about how exactly he got into it. But get into it he did. He's first elected to Battersea Borough Council in 1906 as a progressive, and that was the banner that they went under. This was a sort of an alliance of liberals and socialists and radicals who all stood under this particular banner, and that's how he was described at that time. Later on, he's described as Labour, as the Labour Party sort of coalesces and gets formed from 1919 onwards. He's described as a Labour.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's had a sort of very bizarre route into politics.
It's such a bizarre route. I just wonder what made people think, or what made people have that trust in him, to be able to, to have that voice. It's quite remarkable to me, I think.
Well, it could be as simple as he just saw the way things were run and thought, I can see how that can be done better. I can see how that done in a more sort of fair kind of way. And he certainly, he was absolutely sort of indefatigable on the council. He was on lots and lots of committees. And I mentioned earlier about lack of indoor bathrooms. He was on the Baths and Washhouses committee, which sounds incredibly mundane to us, but when a large part of your population don't have indoor bathrooms, that's actually rather important. And it's a very, sounds like an almost mundane thing to us, but actually it's incredibly important at that time. So he's really sort of, he's into the detail of it, but he also has a sort of a wider vision and wider interests. He attends the first conference of the Pan-African Conference in 1900, which happens at the Caxton Hall in Westminster. The front of the Caxton Hall is still there. Unfortunately, the hall where the meeting took place has gone, but the frontage of it is still there in Westminster. And that's also the building where the Women's Parliament later happened, which was organised by the suffragettes. So it's kind of got a lot of history attached to it. And Archer was there, and he was later involved in something called the African Progress Union, which was again a sort of it went way beyond municipal politics, and showed that he had much wider interests. Again, to illuminate this, we really only got reports of his speeches in the newspapers, and this is the problem: is that with anyone who doesn't leave a diary, and where nobody actually thinks to write about them at the time, as in you haven't got it's like Dr. Johnson had Boswell writing about him and all the rest of it. You haven't got a kind of a Boswell figure writing the stuff down about someone's life. Then a lot of the detail gets lost, and the sort of thing we're talking about is in why did he get into politics? To my knowledge, anyway, and that only goes so far. I mean, there may be other people that know more about this, but I don't think we don't think we've entirely nailed that with him. It's not absolutely clear.
And we do sort of focus towards the end of episode 4 on the fractious relationship that John has got with the press, or it's probably not even worth calling it a relationship at all. They're just mistreating him constantly. Could you shed a little bit more light on sort of how that affected his career and sort of how long it went on? And
well, this is about him saying he's from Liverpool and saying he wants to scotch the rumours that he's him receiving hate mail as well, and them just not being very helpful towards the progression of his career and just sort of hindering it. I'm not sure that the hate mail would have been directly connected with the press, although I mean they would have. It's a bit hard to say as to what extent the prejudice that he encountered. I mean, because he stands up in 1913, in November 1913, when he becomes elected mayor of Battersea. And he's elected by his fellow members, I should say. This is not like a popular election like we're about to have for the Mayor of London. So he's elected by his fellow councillors, and all of them on the progressive side all vote for him except for one. And he gets up and he says, this is a remarkable thing that you've done. You have shown that you have no prejudice. So he himself kind of says that. I mean, this is obviously in a acceptance speech. So he's kind of going to say something like that, really. I mean, if there had been prejudice, he'd be unlikely to highlight it at that point. I mean, what the press did apparently say, because he does refer to the fact that I was born in a little village called Liverpool, which is that obviously somebody had claimed he was from some village in the West Indies or even somewhere else. I mean, the people. It's true then, and it's then as it is now that you will get some journalists who, if they don't know something about someone, then they'll just make something up. They'll just make up a good story, and that may or may not have a racist undertone to it. I mean, it's a bit hard to know what's going on. Maybe it's just it's just somebody who's making stuff up. But we don't know. It's there. The possibility that he encountered racial prejudice is there, and it's also interesting to reflect on whether because he twice acts as election agent for MPs who get elected for Battersea. One is Saklat Vala, who was himself Asian. He was born in Mumbai. And this is in 1922, and Archer is his agent. And then later on in 29, he acts as agent again for the guy that got elected at that point. But he doesn't ever appear to put himself forward to be an MP himself. And there's this because he just knows that there's a limit that he can't go beyond, and that's kind of something that he feels that it would not be tolerated for him to become an MP. Although of course there are non-white MPs way back into the 19th century, and this is one of these ones that keeps being pushed back. The latest thought is that a man called John Stewart, who was elected in 1832, is the first non-white MP. And of course research goes on, and we may find eventually that somebody finds someone in the 18th century and they go, well, actually we think this guy was possibly mixed race. John Stewart, it should be said, was actually a plantation owner, so he's possibly not someone we should be celebrating too much, but he was mixed race apparently. So, and to go back on Piest again, the wording we chose for Archer's plaque, he just says Mayor of Battersea and campaigner against social and racial injustice, I think is the wording, or something close to that. And the reason that we didn't say first black mayor in London, which he was, is because that's kind of a hostage to fortune, because we're pretty confident of that, though. We're pretty confident, but you never know what's gonna kind of come up later, because I mean, for a while it was said that he was the first black mayor or anyone holding a high local office in England or in the UK, and then somebody found out there was this man called Alan Glazer Minns, who was elected mayor of Thetford in Norfolk in 1905, and who'd have thought it, really? But there it is, so the research is going on all the time, and these have hitherto been understudied areas of history, and the work's now going on all the time, which is great. But it does mean you've got to be a bit careful about the claims that you make, and that they're going to actually stand the test of time. This is why the plaque just says Mayor of Battersea, because you can't take that away from him. That's definitely what he was.
Yeah, and obviously social reformer as well. It was really difficult to sort of make the point really clear in the episode that he covered a lot of different social issues whilst he was involved in politics. Was that quite common for local politicians to be so spread out in the issues that they were trying to address, or is that quite unique?
I think it's fairly common for local politicians to spread themselves quite widely over, because it all dovetails in together, doesn't it? I mean, for example, his work on the Baths and Wash Houses Committee dovetails into his work on the Health Committee, because keeping clean and good sanitation is linked to health and so on. So it does all fit together. A lot of what he does.
Yeah. Did he also do? I read something. Bless you. I read somewhere that he did some work around mental health as well, linked to the war. Do you know anything about that? I know I didn't write it in my pre-prepped questions.
No,
I've thrown a cheeky one in there.
I don't actually. I mean, I know that he was, because his mayoralty encompassed the period when the First World War started. So I know that when he got, I looked at my notes of the minute books for the council, which I looked at in Battersea Town Hall, getting on for 10 years ago, and I know that he and his wife Bertha, who was the mayoress, both were thanked for their exceptional work as in the year that they spent as mayor and mayoress, because the war meant that there was an awful lot more for them to do in terms of supporting local charities and so on, and just in doing the sort of things that mayors do, which is mostly ceremonial and a bit symbolic, but it's still very important. You know, it's still a politically very significant role, and that's why, you know, that's why he is celebrated. But no, tell me more about the mental health thing. I don't think I know about that.
It was just that there was something about sort of being aware that shell shock was, well, obviously they didn't have the name shell shock for it, but being aware that there was going to be some sort of mental health crisis after the end of the First World War. And yeah, I just remember reading that and thinking that's the sign of someone that's really forward thinking.
Yeah, he's really switched on. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think he did. I mean, certainly at the end of the war, you do pick up that there's a certain radicalisation in his politics. I mean, as I say, he's election agent to Saklet Vala, who's actually a communist, but Saklet Vala stands on a sort of joint platform. But he's one of the few self-described communists to ever be elected to the British House of Commons. So, and Archer is his agent, although he's not himself ever describes himself as a communist. But it does indicate that he's kind of, for a lot of people, the war was quite a radicalising experience, and I guess that may have applied to him.
Yeah, and that obviously being appointed mayor of Battersea is sort of the big sort of point of his career. In that role specifically, what did he use that platform for? Well,
it was, as I said, mostly a ceremonial role, as it still is today, with people being appointed mayors of their local councils and so on. So, but I mean, I think he saw that when in his acceptance speech, he understood that it had a ramification that went way beyond Battersea, and certainly it was reported all around the world. He got congratulations from all around the world. He also got some hate mail, as you mentioned, but I think the congratulations comfortably outweighed the hate mail. And yeah, I mean, actually, in this connection, I have something to admit, which is that when his name first came before the Blue Plaques panel, which was in 1999, which was before I was involved, the officer concerned thought that John Archer should get a blue plaque. The panel turned him down. They said no, his significance is local. Well, it's a matter of taste, isn't it? I suppose. But I think I can't see that myself at all. I mean, the speeches that he made at the time, the way that it was reported, and as I've talked about, his wider involvement, Pan-African Conference and so on, African Progress Union, I don't think you can say that his significance is only local. That's, the trouble is that, this is what bedevils the history of black people, working class, and of women as well to an extent, is this sense that it's kind of, I don't know, can be somewhat pushed aside. And I'm sorry that happened, and he didn't get his plaque a bit sooner, but we got there in the end. So there we are.
Yeah, well, clearly thanks to you, Howard, because you were on the panel when it went through.
Yeah, a lot of people inquired about it, actually. I mean, it's interesting because we do get it is a nomination, it's a public suggestion based scheme, and the person that actually suggested him second time round and led us to go, yeah, we really should revive this case and look at it again, was from Canada. So we get suggestions from all around the world, and I think it's just someone who'd read about him and thought, hey, that sounds interesting. And it's one where there's a particularly good connection to the house. I mean, he lives there for 20 years. It's all good, really. Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit more about the significance of the building that the plaque is on, and you know, what parts of his life were centered around there, and what his home life would have looked like.
Sure. Well, it's 55 Bryn Mawr Road is the house that was chosen for the plaque, which is the surviving home that he had in Battersea. There were others that don't survive. So yeah, he moves there in about 1898. It's not possible to be absolutely positive about when he moved there, for the kind of reasons I talked about earlier, just the survival of records. It's electoral registers are our key thing here, is where he appears in them. But of course that only tells you that he's there at one particular point, doesn't tell you what point in the previous year that he moved there. So it's 1897 or 98 that he moves there, and he stays there for 20 years with his wife Bertha. And they don't have children. They do have numerous lodgers though, which I assume would have been for mostly, or partly at least, for reasons of economy, that they needed the money to run the house. That the business wasn't enough. It probably ticked over, but it wasn't enough to sort of keep them going. So they had various lodgers. The 1911 census, they've actually got the widow of the first president of Liberia living with them, and again this shows the breadth of the man. I mean, it's crazy, really, isn't it? I mean, yeah, he's extremely well connected, I think. I mean, I don't suppose it was coincidence that she kind of rocked up there and asked for a room. I should think it was there were some good connections going on there. Yeah, and then he moves around the corner. He moves to 214 Battersea Park Road. For a while, he's at 208 as well. And this is for the years after, and that's the building. It does have another plaque on it, on the building that's on the site, but we only commemorate the original buildings on the basis that that's kind of a bit more of a intimate connection where the original structure's there. But there is one on Battersea Park Road as well, which is all well and good. I mean, the more the merrier, really. But that's where the photographic business was, and also latterly it's where the North Battersea Labour Party had their office. I mean, he was that much enmeshed in the party that his home actually doubled as the constituency office for a while, which tells you something. I mean, he's a very dedicated man. I should say too that he was also deputy leader of the Labour group on the council. So he was apart from the mayor office, there were other positions that he held while he was a councillor, and later on when he gets made an alderman, which is a kind of a senior and today a slightly more honorific post. But actually he continues to be active right up till the day that he dies. I mean, it's quite moving actually reading the council minutes, because there's one that says that he hasn't made a particular meeting because he's ill. Then they send a message saying they hope he gets better, and the next whenever they met, it just says that he's sadly died, and that's the end of that. But he basically, he dies in the saddle, as it were, as a municipal politician. It's what he gave his life to.
Yeah. Tatenda, any comments on John, on this amazing role that you're about to take on?
John sounds like a very selfless person to me. He seems like he literally dedicated his life to the people and to try and make a difference for the future moving forward, which is probably why I can see why he probably never had any children, because his life sounds like it was just like manic. But yeah, what would you, as the historian Howard, if you could speak to John Archer on the phone, what would you ask him or tell him?
I would ask him about the early years. Actually, I think to start with, I'd ask him about what the Pennsylvania Jubilee Band sounded like, and just get him to fill in some of those details we don't know about. And then, of course, with the things we talked about today, why did you get into politics, and did you want to stand as a member of Parliament, and what stopped you? All the things we talked about today, really, it would be nice to put to him.
Yeah.
And I'd also, I think I'd get my phone out and I'd show him that, which would probably blow his mind of itself. But I'd like to show him a picture of the plaque on the phone. and then maybe play him some music, play him some, I don't know, Bob Marley or something, and say, we've done a plaque to him too, you know.
I wonder, like, I wonder how much of his, because obviously he came from the Caribbean, so did he go back much, or, you know, was he connected with family there much, or, you know, was his life sort of just here and everything?
I believe that there's no evidence that he did, and we do have kind of quite good digitized records of that now. I mean, it's amazing if you go on the kind of genealogical websites like Ancestry.com, Find My Past and so on, you can find quite easily ship's records. I'm not aware that he comes onto any of those. I may have forgotten something in that, but I think the thing is, of course, he's actually, you know, he's born in Liverpool, and his father is Barbadian, but his own links are by family really, rather than himself. So I think that's sort of as far as it went, really, as far as I know. I'm ready to stand corrected on that, and on anything else.
I wouldn't dare correct you on anything, Howard.
We're all disastrously wrong occasionally.
I mean, I kind of annoyingly want to move away from John Archer just briefly, because obviously this whole series is all about people with blue plaques. So I wanted to ask you more generally about the Blue Plaque scheme that
Sure.
English Heritage is responsible for, and also about nominating people for plaques and how it's sort of moving forward and introducing new plaques for people every year.
Sure. Well, as I said, it is a suggestion-based scheme. So if you have an idea for somebody in London, the main condition is they have to be deceased for at least 20 years, and there has to be a surviving building associated with them. So somewhere like 55 Bryn Mawr Road, which is the exact place where John Archer lived, it needs to be something like that, and then it's a competitive and selective process. So it's not we can't put up all the plaques to suggestions that we receive. But if you've got a good idea, then do go on our website and have a look and fill in the form and so on, and we can guide you through it. That's kind of how it works, and it's worked. It's been a suggestion-based scheme since John Archer's day, actually, since the London County Council took the scheme over in 1903. It's quite remarkable to think that some of those plaques that I've written about were being put up while Archer was, you know, doing his stuff down in Battersea. It's been going a long time, and hopefully it will. I mean, we've got over 950 plaques across Greater London now, which is quite a lot. But then that still leaves quite a lot of houses that don't have plaques on them. So I like to think that, you know, it'll certainly last me for the rest of my working life, I should think.
yeah, that'd be some overtime. But thank you both for joining the chat today, and sort of, you know, giving everyone a space to learn a little bit more about John Archer. We've kind of done this in a weird order because the last few episodes, the people providing the voices for each of these historical icons have done it, and then they're sort of learning more about them. But I think, Tatenda, you've actually got it the right way round, because
I feel very confident now. Like, I feel like the script now in my hands, boom, I can see John Archer in my head now. You know?
Yeah, like mental best mates.
I'm sure you can inhabit him very well. I think, it's you seem right for it.
Thank you.
Excellent speaker. But yeah, no, thank you both for giving us your time, and thank you everybody for watching, and make sure you join us for the next episode where we're talking about the multi-talented singer Elizabeth Welch, and obviously she's the next episode of Plaques of the Future as well, so double whammy once again. But thank you guys, I will cut it there.